Okay, we're going to get started. And as usual, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. Our first guest on our show today, we have Bob Gappa, and I'll introduce him in a second. But let me say this, that the reason that we called our company Loyalty Brands is I have so many people that have been with me for so long. And in fact, I have over 15 people that have been with me for 20 years or more. Most of them, the vast majority of them over 25 years. And that's not even including franchisees, that's just employees. So we have franchisees that we have dozens and dozens of people that have been with us for over 25 years. So, and I like to tease Bob that he's the second most experienced guy in franchising. So, Bob, having said that, open that up. Tell us about your experience.
Well, I think for myself, the most interesting thing is when did I first learn about franchising? And I learned about it when I was in the Catholic seminary studying to be a priest and wanting to be a bishop eventually. And what I learned afterward, reflecting, is that the Catholic Church really is the organization that's been a franchise the longest. And it uses area developers who are called bishops because their job is to open new locations and fill those locations with customers who are interested in achieving salvation, which is the product, if you will, in a secular sense. And so when I finally discovered franchising, I can look back on all the experiences I had with dogma, which is the party line, which is what we believe, our values, how we live them. And so that's how I got into franchising, and then realized I'd been in it all my life. And then I met you. And that was a wonderful part of my life about 35 years ago. And part of what made you interesting to me is that we shared Peter Drucker in common, particularly The Effective Executive and his other book, Managing for Results. And when I Compete came out and I looked at the book and read it, to me, what you did was make Drucker's, those two books, The Effective Executive and Managing for Results, come alive. Because your book is full of stories that illustrate how you can live the principles of managing results and not activities. So thank you for all that. And I've enjoyed working with you whenever I've had the opportunity, still do.
So how many different franchise organizations have you worked with in your life?
It's over 1,650 around the world, including we had an office in Dubai for 5 years where we worked in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, South Africa, India, Egypt. And I've worked in Latin America and had an office in Canada for a while, but it's kind of all a blur right now.
So if we take it back to soon after I met you in one of your seminars, training seminars, we hired your organization. It was Management 2000 back then, right?
Yes, 43 years ago.
Yeah, so that was early 90s. And they came in and did a great job for us at an executive retreat, coming up with our mission statement and our principles in a retreat. I remember in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, we took about 25 executives down there from Jackson Hewitt. And I think the interesting thing, one interesting thing to me is that it reflects how I've learned, how I've progressed over the years in learning about management, leadership, customers, and so forth. And our mission statement at Jackson Hewitt, coming out of that retreat, was winning customers for life. And that, to me, that's where we were back in the early 90s and 80s when I was younger and first in a major management opportunity. And we focused on the customer and customer. And then over the years, over the next few years, management started evolving. And one of the most impactful changes was when I read Herb Kelleher book Nuts about Southwest Airlines. And Nuts is a great name because I think if you make the kind of changes that Southwest made in the industry, then it is nuts. It is a little bit crazy. It is a little bit insane, and you have to do crazy things to change the world. But back in that, did you ever recall, Bob, your transition? I mean, you were part of that, of our focusing on customers. Did you remember when you changed, or were you thinking ahead of me and thinking that employees were number one, that if you wanted to treat your customers number one, you had to treat your employees number one? Do you remember when you came to that realization?
Yes, it was 26 years ago when I first got aware of what Gallup was doing in studying how the environment in which employees worked had the most impact on the profit of the company and the creation of lifetime customers. That if you had well-trained, committed team members who executed an experience that they loved to execute because it created happy, successful customers, that drove profit and growth because it increased frequency of guest visits and it increased promoting the business to their friends and family and sphere of influence. And that's the first time. And of course, Gallup's been studying that now they're in their 26th year. And they just, as a matter of fact, I got in my inbox this week their latest report on how engaged employees and team members are around the world and what the connection is to profit and growth. So, and short answer is 26 years ago, yeah. So there you go. That's the answer.
Back in the 90s, how many great national service companies do you think there were? I mean, in thinking back, and you can start with today if you want, but how many are there in the United States that most 98, 95% or more would say that's a great national service brand?
Not very many, because most people still focus on revenue instead of guests and customers. So maybe, what comes to our mind, of course, is Amazon, which had the commitment to be the most customer-centric brand in the world. And therefore, they needed to have their employees be attentive to the guest and the customer. But I think there are half a dozen maybe that are really committed to team members. And I think the Gallup report today says the same thing, that people still will sacrifice team members for almost anything that produces more revenue. And they think that's actually the connection when it's not. The connection is happy, successful team members executing an experience that makes the customer want to come back.
Yeah, I think if you have that, how can you fail?
You can't.
I mean, right.
Yeah.
And isn't it almost, to me, if you focus on the financials and the profits and ignore the exceeding customers' expectations, ignore treating your employees so that they're happy and successful, then isn't that like long-term suicide?
Yes, absolutely. You're shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. And I think companies are committed to die, to first they'll plateau, and then they'll die if they don't adjust to the concept that employees are number one, and that we all get paid from the customer. Without customers, you don't need a board of directors or investors or CEOs or CFOs or employees, because your customers pay all your bills.
Well, and your focus and mine on results goes back to the person that we both admire a lot and learn from, which is Drucker. And Drucker in the 60s, in his first book, said that there's a reason and a purpose and a result for business. And the reason is economic performance, which really means giving back. Society has to improve because of what you do in some way. And then he said the purpose of a business is to get a customer, and the result is to make sure they're satisfied. And he would have loved the Rolling Stones song, "I Get No Satisfaction." And the reason that song is so successful is because people don't get any satisfaction. That's all they want. That's, when all you want when you spend money somewhere is to make them want you to come back, because you don't want to keep looking around. And if you can make somebody want to come back, then you've got a lifetime customer, even if the transaction is only once in your lifetime. If somebody renovates your home and you're still recommending them, even if you live in a different home, 40 years later, that's the whole point of a guest experience, is to create somebody who will recommend you for life. And now if it's something where you come back frequently, like taxes or dog washing, then every single time it's a new experience, exactly like the Rolling Stones on the concert. This is the gig that makes people want to come back, not the one 20 years ago.
I find that most people, back to what you said about measuring results, is I find that most people they can't get off measuring activity. They can't get off. They can't let it go. They can't let it go. If someone, and I had a CFO, and even my own people who I preached to continuously, I had a CFO that watched out the window to see what time his staff was arriving in the morning.
Yeah.
And what difference does it make, right? And I had a new executive that's starting next month. And she said, "What am I going to do the first 90 days?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to say this, that we manage by results, not activities. And so what I'm going to do is, or we're going to do together, is lay out the results you're going to obtain in 90 days. And then you can invent the activities that result in those results, right?
Yeah.
That obtain those results." And so that people want to know what they're going to do, and great leaders want to know what you're going to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Your value is in what you achieve, not what you do. And
Exactly.
I heard, go ahead.
Exactly. One of the things I think that is kind of funny, a funny example, but it really makes the point, and I think you can identify with this based on the story I heard about you this week, is if you had a file clerk and their goal incorrectly was to make sure that every file on their desk was filed before they left, and we're going to manage that activity. But the point is, what if you couldn't find any of the files they filed? Because when you file something, the point is, can I find it? Not did I file it? That's the activity. Can it be found? And people don't get that the only important thing is to manage the result. And so you could say, I filed 100 files, but I can't find any of them. Well, then you're managing activities.
Yeah, and the same thing someone mentioned this week about hard work. And one of the podcasts I was on, I'm doing about last 4 months, I've done a podcast a day. So I've done like 4 months, I've done over 130 podcasts. But one of the podcasts I was on yesterday, he said something about hard work that because when they asked me for a final thought on these podcasts, on these business podcasts, I generally say, find something you love to do, work hard, and persevere.
Yeah.
And he said, rightfully so, we didn't really, because it was the last seconds of the show, we didn't expand on that. But it can't, perseverance is the most important thing. And hard work is not the key. I have learned that everything worthwhile requires hard work, but hard work that's the wrong work isn't useful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's pretend that you're in a seasonal business like the tax business, and you work 14 hours a day in July, right? Versus doing it in April. I mean, in April, you're working 14 or 16 hours a day because that's when the customers are there. If you make the mistake and take April off and work your 14 to 16, I mean, that's stupid, but that hard work needs to be, it isn't everything. It's the result that you obtain from that work.
Yeah, and people often equate hard work with being busy. And I think being busy is an insult, actually. Being productive is much better than being busy. And I remember I was asked one time by the board of directors of a franchise company to assess the corporate staff because they thought there was too many people working and not enough being done. And I found out, this is incredible, I found out after about 60 days of monitoring the team that on average, each person was productive 1 hour a day. And it equated to $5 million of wasted overhead. And the two founders, a husband and wife team, refused to fire anybody because they said, we wouldn't be able to live like we do and drive Rolls Royces if those people hadn't been here to help us. And so now it's kind of like their retirement program, only they aren't retired. They come to work every day. But they did not do anything after they discovered that they were wasting $5 million a year in overhead because it would have affected getting rid of people who weren't being productive. So rather than make them productive and help them be productive, they decided to do nothing.
I read a short magazine article recently about, speaking of doing nothing, that a consultant was called in to a founder who had turned the company over to a couple of executives, or he had two key executives, and he was going to turn over the company, and he asked the consultant to evaluate the two key executives, and the consultant came back to him a month later and said, both of them are the problem. You need to fire them. And the chief executive founder said, I can't fire them. And he said, the consultant said, rightfully so, then you're the problem, right? And so the husband and wife you're talking about are the problem, not the staff. They're the problem.
Yep. Yeah, I think it would be helpful for people to understand the word perseverance from your experience, because I don't think it's very appreciated, because there's times when you have to stop being perseverance, but I think that for you, it's a really important word in the two companies prior to Loyalty Brands. And you may need some time to think about it, but I know you've got some wisdom just off the top of your head on how perseverance has helped you and what it really means in practice on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that you're right about when I talk about perseverance. just remember there's always an exception to every rule, right?
Mhm.
So when I give you the rule, there's only three certainties in life: death, tax, and change. And everything else can be 99.999%, but it's not certain. But perseverance is. So having said that, perseverance is the key attribute of success. And if you divide the world into just two categories, winning and losing, winners and losers. And people hate that when I use the word losers. So maybe you can help me come up with a better word, but they don't like it when I say losers. But everyone faces adversity. Everyone, and I certainly in my 15-year career at Jackson Hewitt and my 20-year career at Liberty faced huge adversity, huge problems. And I mean, black periods that were like death. I mean, one in each company were just incredibly difficult tax seasons. So I've had 55 tax seasons. I've had two really, really difficult, and most of them 40 or 50 are just excellent. And a few are blah, but I faced huge adversity inside and out. And I told the story that, for example, when I bought Mel Jackson Tax Service, I bought 6 offices from his widow, and they came with about 35 employees and two managers. The founder had died, and his widow was in seminary, and so she wasn't involved in the business. And they told me when I bought it that the 2 key employees were going to stay, and they were looking forward to working with me. I came back from the closing the day I closed, and they both quit. And not only did they quit, they both competed, and they both used their name, which was well known in all of the customers. So many, if not most of the 11,000 customers that we acquired knew of Audrey Myers and Brenda Smith. And they opened Brenda's Tax Service and Audrey Myers Tax Service. So there's adversity all the time. And losers eventually give up and don't overcome adversity. They stop, and they've had enough. They throw up their hands. I can't do it anymore. But winners, they never stop. They never stop. They take what's thrown at them, and they figure a way to go over the top or around that way or underneath or around. They're always adjusting with the latest tragedies or disappointments. And I don't know of a day in my life almost where in business, my business has been so large that I don't hear about a problem or hear about a difficulty. And so I'm always faced with it, but it never occurs to me. It never occurs to me that I can't overcome and continue on. And so, yes, perseverance is the key thing. And it's so critical if you're a leader, because there's so many people depending on you. I mean, when I was at the biggest company I had was 500 employees and 2,000 franchisees who had 15,000 employees, and they're all depending on John Hewitt. And so that's an incredible responsibility. And they got to kill me to stop me.
Well, I want a follow-up question for you, listening to what you just said about perseverance, because not only do people depend on you who are on the team, but you depend on them. And what I see, what I'd like you to comment on, which I don't think anybody's ever asked you, is you also have patience with people who have to grow into acquiring and mastering skills, knowledge, and abilities to get results. And where you are in your experience, you must look at all of us on the team and say, some of you are incompetent now, but I'm going to have patience while you stumble around and figure out how to drive the car without trainer wheels or the bike without trainer wheels. And I've always thought that's a trait that you and other great leaders have to have, because I think you remember when you had trainer wheels back at Block and how you don't need them anymore. And maybe that helps you be patient while you persevere.
Well, that's exactly right. None of the staff. It'd be hard to make a mistake that I haven't either made or seen, and think incorrectly the way that I had thought, or until I learned. So it's and if you expected perfection of any human being, then you will never have a moment of satisfaction. We are imperfect and we're constantly learning. What I told one of my new employees recently, I think it might have been in the same conversation when she was asking me about what her assignment's going to be the first 3 months. And I said, the number one thing I require of you is a commitment to improve, because the size of your role today is nowhere near what it's going to be 2, 4, 6 years from now. So I need you to improve, and I don't expect nor need perfection, but I need a commitment to listen. And it's funny with people about every employee I've ever had wants me to listen to them, right? And if I'm not listening carefully or I don't listen well enough, I get chastised either to my face or behind my back. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they're not listening to me. So which is funny, because that you would think that was someone that reported to someone that would be, usually the people that say I'm not listened to are the people that report to someone. But I'm going to say it as a leader. I'm often not listened to, just as they're not listened to. So but back to the mistakes. Mistakes. They say mistakes are a wise man's education, a smart person's education. And I don't know many smart people, but wise men learn from the mistakes of others. And there are almost very few that learn by their own mistakes, let alone learning from the mistakes of others. And that is such a difficult find. If you can find a person, a friend, a employee, a partner that is willing to improve, listen and improve, then that's a gem.
That's interesting, because let's say that I'm living with somebody who I think would appreciate that. If I make a change, it's bound to affect that other person. And since I'm unsure of how that's going to happen, I'm just going to not change. Some people are hesitant to have an effect on somebody else, and so they just want to stay where they are rather than I don't know, cause a ripple in the water or something. But I want to go back to listening, because I've observed now, being on your board, coming into starting the 6th year, I've watched on the executive calls and others, and the hot lead calls, that you really listen. And I'm wondering, I've always wanted to ask you this. I'll give you what I think, and I want to see if to what extent you agree. I think when you're listening, you can't have anything else on your mind. And I think that's what makes people bad listeners. They want to make a point and they can't listen because they want to make the point and they want you to stop talking. Not you personally, but I want to make my point so I don't have to listen to what you're saying. Very few people say, that's a good point, and what I want to add to that is, or very few people say, let me see if I really understood what you just said. Let me feed it back to you. And you tell me if I got it right, if I really listened. I've watched you and you'll go back to somebody who talked 2 minutes ago and go, hey, what did you really mean by that? And I don't think you have anything else on your mind on those calls. Is that true or not true?
Well, I'm not sure I would describe it as having nothing on my mind. I would describe it as being focused and building on what they said.
Okay.
Most people want to make their own point before they build on what. And now that you say it that way, if someone's talking in a story, then you can either clarify the story, or, well, what about this? Or what about that about the story? So you can talk about their story and build on it and say, well, why don't we offer that person this? Or why don't you think about this? But most people are thinking of their own story. I want to tell my own story instead of let me get into your story. Let me focus on your story and see if there's some nugget that we can all improve from on your story. So I hopefully am better or good at taking your story and running with it versus, oh, okay, that's a nice story, but how about this story? Most people want to tell their own story. They want to talk about themselves, and so while you're talking, they're thinking about what they're going to say instead of, okay, what can, I guess maybe we should encourage people to as an exercise to do that, right? When someone's talking, and let's say in a hot lead call where we're talking about interested people, right? Maybe we should have an exercise where others ask them about that person and say, well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that, before they tell their own story.
That's a good idea.
Maybe that would be a good learning experience, because what you said is an eye opener to me, that is true, but I hadn't gone the next step with, okay, how do we change people to get better at it?
Yeah. I've said about you, but never to you. I've said about you to many people the following, and I'm wondering to what extent you consider it valid. I have said that you are far more of an opportunist than you are an entrepreneur. As a matter of fact, I think you're one of the people who is always looking for opportunities. And sometimes it actually drives people crazy around you when you land on one and start pursuing it. And because again, I think that I've often said this too, and to you, but I think your mastery, your pursuit of the mastery of chess allows you to see an opportunity and how it fits in your chessboard of loyalty brands. And everything pets, I think, is a good example of that. But when do you remember starting to be an opportunist? Always back when you tried to find people to play cards with and pay your college tuition by winning at poker or whatever it was?
Well, can I define opportunist as including making mistakes? Can opportunists make mistakes?
You have to.
Then I have to go back to one of my mother's favorite stories about me when I was 4 years old. And we lived in Rochester, New York, and I got a sled for Christmas that cost her $4. And before noon, I went next doors and sold it to the neighbor for 10 cents. Now, of course, I had to give the 10-cent back, but yeah, I've always, and when you say that, which is the subset, isn't opportunity, when you see an opportunity, one of the weapons to take advantage of opportunity is being an entrepreneur. But there's other weapons too, right? If you see an opportunity, it might be just to hire someone. It might be to put two people together that that might be able to work together or something like that. So I think entrepreneurism is just one of the subsets of opportunity.
I think so. And also, you're being an opportunist and perseverance. You also reach a point where you're not tolerant anymore if it's not working out. And so perseverance doesn't mean that you stick with something that you know isn't going to get the end result, right? I mean, the result is the most important thing. And as long as you're moving toward it, persevere. But if it's not, cut bait.
Yeah, that's why when you asked me before, I talked about, when you asked me about perseverance, I started it by saying that there's an exception to every rule. And there are times that you're taking the wrong path. And then perseverance isn't a good thing. You have to decide if that particular situation is the wrong path, then you have to stop and change path, right? Yeah. So you can't continually beat your head against the wall, and if there's no success in sight. So Kenny Rogers said it really well. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Yeah. And perseverance is, if you're going in the right direction, then perseverance is the most important attribute. But if you're going in the wrong direction, you have to stop and find a new direction.
Yeah, and to me, loyalty brands the name, and perseverance and tolerance. To me, loyalty to you, to somebody else, means that you have more perseverance and more loyalty to people than to things and to brands. And I imagine, because I've watched this with you, and so I have this image of you in the rider's seat of a car, and you don't reach over and pull the steering wheel to avoid an accident unless you absolutely have to. You'd rather let the person miss almost being killed so they learn, rather than grab the wheel and say, I just saved your life, but they didn't learn anything. And that's an attribute. Perseverance and tolerance of people growing, I think, is one of the greatest attributes that makes people loyal to you, because they know that on rare occasions, though, you're going to walk into somebody and confront them in a way that they might not like to be confronted. But that's kind of like grabbing the wheel at the last moment.
Yeah, I think the general theory on that, the business theory that I agree with, is that if the only time you take executives and you give them their head, and you have to let them make mistakes, or else they're just going to be a miniature you, and they're going to be a yes person, and then you're just limited by your own ability. Yeah. And if I have executives that they can add to it, then the combined result's going to be more beneficial almost every time. So, but if I just tell them exactly what to do and don't let them make a mistake and correct them, then we're never going to learn, and we're never going to get all we can be. So I think that that's a requirement, that you have to let people make mistakes. And I think people appreciate that, as you said, loyalty. Last call I had last week, I talked about when my CFO, who not a good guy, he made a mistake on October 31st we're a public company, and we got sued, and he didn't tell the auditors, and that was the end of the quarter. And we announced our quarterly numbers a few days later with the auditors approving, without saying that we got sued, because he was the only one that knew. And I said, we got yelled at by the board of directors. I got yelled at by the board of directors. And I never said I didn't know that happened. I just took the blame, right? And so I don't place blame on other people because I'm always partly to blame. I mean, when you're a CEO, the buck stops here.
Yeah.
And so I don't chide people about their mistakes. I require them to learn from them. And if you kept making the same mistake over, you're not going to make it, right?
Right.
But let's talk about loyalty in a different way. That sometimes people throw it in my face. When someone gets fired, and to me they fire themselves.
Yeah.
Right. You
Yeah.
and I are big believers in we set up results. But to me, that we set up results, we set up the budget and the resources to get those results, and that's your job.
Yeah.
And if you continually don't hit results, you haven't done your job. And so we didn't fire them; they fired themselves.
Yeah.
So I require two things from people, right? They're principled, they follow our principles, and they get results. And most people can't get that. If someone gets fired or laid off, or then they turn it on me like, yeah, you're really loyal, right? That give loyal, because one of our principles is at both Liberty Tax and loyalty brands is give loyalty, get loyalty.
Yeah.
And they throw it back at us like we haven't been loyal to them. Well, that's not what loyalty means.
Yeah. And a long time ago in USA Today, when it was real popular and everybody read it at the hotel room in the morning, they had an article on 4 types of people. And one type was people who live your principles and get results. The second one was people who live your principles and don't get results. And I know that when you run into somebody like that, you try to find a place where they can get results. But then there's the people who don't live your principles and don't get results. That person's easy to exit. But the person that's toxic and is hard to get rid of is the person who doesn't live your principles and gets results. That's the person that's the hardest to get rid of. And I'm sure that you've had examples of that in your life, where this person gets results, but they're toxic to the culture. You're on mute, John.
Yeah, exactly. And that reminds me of in the Effective Executive, my favorite part of the book is when Lincoln hires Ulysses S. Grant after he had a couple of generals that didn't do anything, and they didn't want to make a mistake, and that's toxic, right? That and so he hires Lincoln, and Lincoln, he attacks and he wins, and he attacks and he loses, and he wins and he wins and he loses, and we're winning the war. But apparently he wasn't following the principles, or the principles of Congress anyway. So Congress came to Lincoln and said, Grant's a drunk. He's at night, he fires his guns in the air, and he has a dog with him, and he yells and screams, and he's an embarrassment to the U.S. Army and to our government, and you need to get rid of him. And Lincoln turns to his secretary and said, James, find what brand of alcohol Grant drinks, and buy a barrel for all my generals. So the question of toxicity is, it's not black and white, right? It's a gray area. And certainly if Grant had shot someone when he was shooting his guns off at night, and if he shot and killed someone or injured someone, he would have been fired and replaced. but it's not an easy decision whether you're violating the principles or not. I
No,
mean,
it's not.
sometimes it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's obvious. If someone steals, right? They steal
Yeah.
$5,000, right?
Yeah.
That's obvious, right? But sometimes it's the way they treat people, and Congress certainly had a different opinion than Lincoln did of whether Grant was violating the principles, right? Lincoln said
Yeah.
he has not violated my principles, and I'm going to go a little bit bend over backwards because I need him to win the war. And Grant, of course, went on to be president, U.S. president. So he wasn't that horrible of an individual, apparently. But Congress, most people, I think, most people are like Congress, that jump too quick to judge someone as toxic and unprincipled and can't live with. And one of my weaknesses in the book, and what Drucker is proving, is people with great weaknesses, or strengths rather, have great weakness. And what one of my weaknesses is I'm too forgiving, and I put up with too much before I pulled the trigger. And so and I consciously do that because I would rather go too far in giving people a chance than too not far enough. So I do make the mistake in those situations of giving people too much rope before I pull the trigger.
Well, I couldn't find a better way to end this call with that, because that weakness that you call your greatest weakness is why people are still loyal to you. So it's maybe not your greatest weakness.
There's everything is good and bad, right? There's nothing that's all good or all bad, right? And
Well,
I'm sure go ahead.
Well, no, I for one I want you to keep that greatest weakness, because I may benefit from it soon.
Hopefully not.
I know, but keep it, please.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bob. This has been a great show. I appreciate your being on, and we'll have a wonderful day. And thank you, everyone, for your attention. One more question. There's a question from the audience, Bob. You want to take a shot at it?
I don't know what it is.
This may not be your expertise, but I'll answer it after you. If you get it, I'll either add value, I'll listen to what you say and add value, or let it run. But the question is, if you're going to become a franchisor and you're a mom and pop and you have a business, if you're going to become a franchisor, is it sufficient to have one office, or do you need to have, or one location successful, or do you need 5 or 6 locations?
If I had the money and the time to expand, to verify and validate, I'd do 5 or 6. If I didn't, and I had an opportunity and I was confident that this could be replicated, I'd do it. But I would do it around the market closest to me, so I made sure that my first 5 or 6 were successful.
So you'd want, so I agree with that. And obviously that momentum is so key, and you can't, every time you put out another winning location, it's just going to accelerate your growth. But if you put it on a losing location, it's a step back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for your time today, and everyone, and have a great day, everyone.
Same to you. Bye.